Just over a week ago, I put a post out on YouTube inviting anybody to ask me their Canon related questions. I did get a pretty good response, and in this video I'm going to attempt to answer every single one of those questions. So if you've got a Canon camera, stick around because there may be some cool things that you're going to pick up, maybe some bonus tips along the way. Welcome to the Photo Genius channel. Hi, Paul here from Photo Genius. Welcome to my channel where I like to post regular photography tutorials. I share tips and tricks, and occasionally I do gear reviews as well. And sometimes, just like this video, I do a Q&A where I invite you to ask me questions about a topic. This time it's Canon, and then I answer the questions in this video. Now, I've been taking photos for many years. I've been teaching photography for 12 years, and I've been running this YouTube channel for over 5 years. And during that time, I have made a heap of Canon related tutorials. So if you are fairly new to cameras and you've got a Canon camera, you should check those out. I've created a playlist for you. I'll put a link up here and also in the description below this video because you might want to check it out after. Okay, here I've got a Canon 1500D, I've got a Canon 1300D, here I've got a Canon 80D. I've also recently had an opportunity to test out the mirrorless cameras like the R5 and the R6. So I do think I'm fairly qualified to answer your questions. Let's get into it with the very first one. So Joshua, what I don't know, of course, from your question is what camera you already have. I'm assuming it's a Canon camera and you probably got the kit lens, which is the 18 to 55mm lens. And that is a great lens to begin with. With that lens at 18mm, you're going to get a fairly wide field of view. And you've got a little bit of zoom, which will take you to 55mm, which is fairly standard. Now, another lens that would complement this might be a telephoto lens, particularly if you want to shoot things that are further away, like sports or wildlife, or that, or just give you a more narrow view. Now, of course, if you're a beginner, and I'm assuming therefore you are on a budget and you don't want to go too crazy, then start with something like this. This is the Canon 75 to 300mm telephoto lens. Now, I have to say that this is the cheapest Canon telephoto lens in the range, and it is not a pro lens by any means. It's not amazing quality, but as I often say in my videos, it's how you use the gear rather than the gear itself. I've used this lens and taken some great photos, including some really great moon photos. Now, if you're not looking for a telephoto lens, you might want to consider what is called a prime lens. Now, a very popular prime lens is what is often called the Nifty 50, and here it is. This is the Canon 50mm f1.8 prime lens. No zoom with this lens. It's a fixed focal length, so the zoom is your feet. You either walk closer or walk further away from your subject to change your composition. Now, what this lacks in zoom, it makes up for in aperture. Maximum aperture is f1.8, and if you're not sure what that means in terms of how it's going to affect your picture, a wider aperture will mean more light can pass down the lens, so this lens is really good in low light. It also means that you will get a shallow depth of field, which is a fancy term for meaning blurring backgrounds and blurring foregrounds. So on a budget, the 50mm is always my go-to recommendation for Canon users. I hope that helps. Okay, so with the T7i, as with some other Canon cameras, you may occasionally see this message come up on the back, which basically says busy. Now, it doesn't mean that this is an error. It simply means that the camera is busy doing something, and almost certainly what it's doing is it's still writing information to the memory card. So this is not usually much of a problem, but it can slow you down when you're taking photos. Now, from the question, you don't mention what sort of scenario this is happening in, but I'm going to guess that it's happening when you're taking a burst of photos or a series of photos. So you might be photographing sports or wildlife, for example. Now, what you're doing when you're taking multiple images is you're writing a lot of information, or the camera's writing a lot of information, and then it's saving it to the memory card. And the quicker it can save that information, the less likely you're going to see a message like busy. So it may be that the best thing for you to do is upgrade your memory card. Again, I don't know what you're using here, but there are certain cards which are faster. Now, obviously you pay a bit more for them, but a faster memory card allows the camera to write information to that card quicker, and is a real benefit if you want to take photos quickly or in a burst. Now, if your camera doesn't have the busy message on the LCD screen, some cameras just have a flashing LED on the back of the camera, which usually means the camera is busy writing information to the memory card. Now, one thing I'd like to add is if there ever is a flashing LED on the back of a camera or a message like busy, don't turn your camera off, because it's still writing information to the card and it could corrupt the memory card. Now, before I move on to the next question, I just want to mention to you that I've launched a brand new website. As well as info on my photography courses and workshops, the new website is also the home to the Photo Genius online store. Here you can purchase a range of photography gear and accessories, and I'm very pleased to have Nissi Filters on board, who offer an amazing range of photography filters. We also have Sarui tripods, Sunway Photo and Explorer Photo and Video. So the website address is learnphotography.com.au, but I'll put a link up here that will take you straight to it if you want to check it out. So Dark Relic, your question relates to the Canon T7, which here in Australia is the EOS 1500D. I've had this camera for some time. I bought it when it was brand new. I've taken heaps of photos with this camera. I've actually made a dedicated video all about this camera that I'll link up here so you can check it out. And this is a great entry-level camera. Of course, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles that the more expensive cameras or some of the newer mirrorless cameras are going to have, but it doesn't really matter too much, because as a beginner, you've got to just learn the basics, and it's more about technique than the camera that you have. And I say this time and time again in my videos, you can take amazing photos with beginner entry-level cameras as long as you know what you're doing, and hopefully I can help you out there, because that's what I do. I make tutorials, so watch my videos. So yes, the T7, great solid beginner's camera. So this is a very broad question, how to create cinematic videos with an entry-level camera. Well, it's not that you can't, but there may be some issues. The 1500D T7 is a great stills camera, but it's an okay video camera. So let me give you some tips that may help you. Firstly, let's talk about focusing. This camera in the movie mode or the video mode can be a bit slow and a bit sluggish when it comes to focusing. So try manual focus, give it a go, practice, switch the lens from auto to manual focus using the switch, have a go at focusing yourself, and you may find that that solves the problems. Image quality, shoot at the best image quality the camera allows, which is 1080p at 24 frames a second. You can also really improve the look of your videos by using a prime lens, which will give your images a bit more depth, particularly if you shoot with the aperture wide open. And finally, of course, but incredibly important, is how you edit your footage and pull it all together to create your movie. I'm not sure what sort of software you've got, if any. I use Premiere Pro, which is a more professional application. There are plenty of other free applications you can try out, and I'm sure there's plenty of good video tutorials as well that will help you out there. So look, time doesn't allow me to get into this any further really. I could probably make a whole video about this one, but you can make great movies with this. You just need to work around the limitations of the camera. So this is another question relating to creating videos and movies. My particular Canon, this is the 1500D, actually records MP4 files, and there is no option to change it to any other format such as MOV. It just is what it is. I'm not sure what your camera records, but it sounds like it records MOV. You want to record MP4s. Well, if your camera doesn't allow it, like this one doesn't allow me to change the format, then what you're going to need to do is change the format using software, and there's lots of options to choose from. So just go to Google, type in convert MOV to MP4 or vice versa, and I'm sure you'll find one. So I had quite a few questions asking me about focusing and sharpness of images. Tara was wanting sharper images from her T7. Nina wanted to know about what is tack sharp and what does that mean. Daniel was asking about focus points. Now I have made two videos all about focusing. One is about focus points and one is about different focus modes that you use for maybe moving versus non-moving subjects. I'll put those links below this video so you can check those out, because those videos go into it a lot deeper than I really want to in this short video. But really, focusing is incredibly important. We want our image to be sharp. Now, sometimes an image isn't sharp and we question why. And focus tends to be the thing we go to first, but it's not always the problem. Now, whilst focusing could be the problem, you also need to factor in your shutter speed. Was the shutter speed slow? And if you were hand holding your camera, does that mean that the camera's actually recorded your hand movements? This is the reason why we use tripods. So sometimes I see images that are blurry. People ask me about them and why do I think the image is not sharp and why is it blurry? And sometimes when we drill down and actually look at the settings, we end up working out that actually the focus wasn't the issue here. The camera moved and that's why things don't look sharp. So that's something you need to really consider carefully. Now, when it comes to focusing, autofocus is usually the way to go. It's my preferred way of using the camera. Manual focus is another great option, but it does take a little bit longer, which is not an issue if you're doing landscape photography or architectural photography where you've maybe got a bit more time. But if you're shooting moving subjects, portraits, animals, wildlife, then autofocus is certainly the way to go. And autofocus is great because it means the camera's focusing for you, but if you're shooting in the manual mode, and of course that means getting out of auto, it means you can help the autofocus make the right choices. And you can do this in a number of ways by choosing the right focus mode. If you're shooting a moving subject, set your focus mode to AI servo. Then the camera will adjust the focus in real time as your subject moves. If you're shooting a static subject, set the camera to one shot, which is the perfect focus mode as your default focus mode. If you don't want to be bothered with this, set your camera to AI focus and the camera will switch then between servo and one shot for you. It's not my choice, but that's another option if you don't want to be too hands-on with your camera. Now, controlling the focus points is incredibly important because it means when you're controlling your focus points, you're able to show the camera or tell the camera where your subject is and what you want it to focus on. If you don't do this, the camera's going to focus on what it thinks the subject is, and this can often cause problems. So again, I've made a separate video all about it. I definitely recommend checking it out. But with these cameras, it's actually incredibly easy. So focusing is of course a big subject. It's incredibly important that your subject is sharp and in focus. So hopefully they're giving you a few things to think about. So Chase, a bit cheeky, asking 3 questions, but let's try and tackle all 3, starting with the best camera mode. If you are an absolute beginner, you're fairly new to photography, I would go with the program mode because unlike auto, where you don't get any control over the camera, program gives you the ability to make some changes to some of the camera settings and do things like exposure compensation. So you can actually make your images brighter or darker rather than just the camera giving you whatever it gives you. I have made a video all about program mode, so look that one up. Question 2 was sizes. I'm not quite sure what you mean by sizes, but I'm guessing you actually meant settings. What are the best camera settings? Well, look, this is the question I can't answer because the camera settings depend on how much light is available at the time. For example, if you're shooting at night time, a good way of taking photos in poor light is to put the camera on a tripod and slow the shutter down. But if you're shooting somewhere bright, it's the complete opposite. Generally then you're going to use a faster shutter speed. So there are no ideal perfect settings because I don't know the scenario. I don't know where you're going to be, what the light's going to be. So question 2, I can't answer in one video for you, I'm afraid. Question number 3, cheap lens for weddings. Well, I'm going to go back to the nifty 50 again. It's the best budget Canon lens you can buy. The Canon 50mm f1.8 prime lens, also known as the nifty 50, is incredibly popular. It's cheap, it's fun, it's very popular for weddings. That's my recommendation. So Ryan, in your post, you don't actually say much, but you do mention night mode. Now cameras like this do have some preset modes. There's a landscape mode, a portrait mode, a sports mode, and some cameras have a night mode. Now these are automated options where you have no control over the camera. So for me, they're completely out. I would rather see you take photos using a mode like maybe shutter priority, aperture priority, or better still, the manual mode. And this will mean if you're taking photos at night time, putting your camera on a tripod and generally slowing the shutter down. Now, because I don't want to drag this video out and make it really long, that's as far as I'm going to go on this one. But I have made a video all about taking nighttime photos where I go into a lot more detail, and I recommend you checking that out. I'll put a link, you guessed it, in the description below this video. So Khalil Photographing Cars is asking about the ideal shutter speed, aperture and ISO to use. Now, this is always a very difficult question to answer because the ideal settings that you're going to set the camera to are based on how much light is available at the time. You know, this is the question I get asked so much. What are the perfect settings for car photography? What are the perfect settings for sports photography? What are the perfect settings for you know, taking photos of my kids? It depends largely on the look you're looking for, and also and mostly how much light is available at the time. But because I don't want to skip your question, my recommendation is firstly ISO, keep it low. 200 is probably ideal. Aperture, choose an aperture based on the look you want. If you want to concentrate on certain details of the car and you want a softer background, then go for a shallow depth of field, which means using a wider aperture, which of course is a lower number. The time of day that you choose is obviously going to impact things. Cars are generally quite shiny, so bright days might not be ideal. A dull overcast day might actually give you better results. Now, a great tip when photographing cars is to use a polarizing filter to remove reflections and glare off the windscreen and also parts of the bodywork. So Thomas, you're a glasses wearer just like me. I wear my glasses now most of the time, but when I'm taking photos, I don't want to wear my glasses. So I'm not sure if you know this, but you can adjust the viewfinder. I've just taken my glasses off, which means that now everything is very slightly soft. But when I put my camera up to my eye, I can adjust what is called the diopter by turning this tiny little dial next to the viewfinder. Now what this will do is it will shift the element inside and adjust so that I can see better. It's a bit like going to the opticians. And look, it doesn't matter whether you wear glasses or not. I would definitely recommend doing this. Anybody watching this video, adjust the diopter, look through the viewfinder, and you might find that you can actually sharpen things up. I mean, for me, this is great because it means I don't need to wear my glasses when I'm taking the picture. Sadly though, if I want to see if my photo's any good, I do need to put my glasses back on, but that's life. So this is an interesting question. When will Canon release their next DSLR camera? Well, I think I can be fairly confident in saying never. The DSLR, as we know it, has pretty much reached the end of its life. Things have evolved, and of course now companies like Canon and Nikon are putting all their efforts into the mirrorless systems because that is without a doubt the future. Now Canon have their M series mirrorless cameras, which are their smaller bodied cameras using the cropped sensor, and of course they have their RF range of mirrorless cameras as well, such as the R5 and the R6, which are their full frame mirrorless cameras. Now what I suspect we'll see sometime next year is I think Canon will release an RF mount mirrorless camera aimed more at the beginner or the entry-level buyer. I think they'll do a similar thing to what Nikon have done with the Z50 and the ZFC, and that's release a camera with a cropped sensor inside, but you can use the RF mount and the RF lenses as well as the older lenses with an adapter. I think that's definitely the way to go, but we'll have to see. So as far as I know, there will be no more DSLRs from Canon. Everything's now going mirrorless, and I think that's the future. But if you're not quite ready for that jump, sit on the fence, because of course as more cameras out, the prices will start to drop. So Wes, to find out which version firmware you've got on your 850D, it's pretty much standard on most cameras. This isn't an 850D, but as an example, I'm in the manual mode. I press menu and then I simply scroll across the top tabs using the right button. until I get to the yellow tabs. They have what looks like a wrench or a spanner icon. From the list, firmware usually sits at the bottom, so you just got to go down, press set, and then it should tell you what your firmware version is and how to update it. And of course I've made a separate video on this and you can check it out, link down below. Okay, Dana, let's talk about white balance. Now, white balance is a camera setting that allows you to effectively tell the camera what type of light you're shooting under, be it sunlight, cloudy day, shooting in the shade, or maybe shooting under artificial light if you're taking photos indoors. By setting the camera to the correct white balance, the camera then knows which adjustments to make sure that your colors look realistic. Aside from setting it manually, you can also select automatic white balance where the camera selects this for you. And to be perfectly honest with you, that's the way to go, at least I think so. I'd rather you set the camera's white balance to auto white balance, leaving you to worry about the bigger stuff, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you want to change white balance, you can. It's actually pretty easy to do, but mostly I don't think you need to. Now, if you are taking photos in the RAW format, there's an even better reason then to not shoot, not to manually adjust your white balance, because with RAW files, you can change the white balance later using Lightroom or Photoshop or similar software. But if you are shooting JPEGs, then you probably want to be a bit more careful about your white balance settings, because you can't fix that after when you're post-processing your images. So look, if I'm totally honest with you, I would say 99% of the time my cameras are set to automatic white balance and I'm very happy with what the camera does for me. If I want to change it, or if I'm not happy, I can change it myself, but mostly I don't need to. And of course, just like everything else, I've made a video on this one. I'll put a link in the description below. If when recording video you find that you've got no sound, it probably means that your sound recording settings are turned off. Now, to fix this, it's pretty easy. Make sure the camera is set to the video mode, go into the menu, and then just scroll through and look for the option that says sound recording. Then press the set button on the back and make sure that it's set to auto. This should fix it for you. Okay, Sean, so you want to blur backgrounds. This is called a shallow depth of field. You've got a Canon 90D and you've got two lenses, the 85mm and a 17 to 50mm zoom lens. So out of those two lenses, you're probably going to get the best results with the 85mm lens, because the longer the focal length, the more shallow the depth of field. The next tip is to open the aperture as wide as the lens will allow, so that's a lower f number. And finally, try and get a bit closer to the subject. As long as you can tick those three boxes, you should get a fairly good result, which should be a nice soft background. Now, the other part of your question was in regards to using Godox flashes. I've never used them, so I actually can't help you with any advice on using that particular flash because I'm not familiar with it, I'm sorry. So Candice, a two-part question. Let's look first at the second part, which is about where you should point your camera in relation to the sun. Kind of the old-fashioned way of thinking is that you should always have the sun behind you. I get it, and that works fine, but if you're taking a picture of somebody and the sun is behind you, then that somebody is looking into the sun, and that's not going to be comfortable for them. Probably the light will be really harsh, and they may even be squinting, which is not going to give a very great, a nice look to the portrait. So in my view, there's no problem with pointing the camera in the general direction of the sun, although it is advisable not to point it directly at the sun, and why would you anyway? Pointing the camera in the direction of the sun, I think, is quite acceptable. I mean, really, just look at your subject and move your subject around. Find the position that gives you the best look, the best light. Maybe moving your subject out of the sun and into shade is a better option. You also asked about which lens to take and use when you're doing family portraits at family events. Well, again, it depends on what you're trying to photograph, really. I mean, I know I mention this lens a lot, but the nifty 50 is great, particularly if you want to shoot maybe individuals, because you can open the aperture wide, you'll get a nice soft background, the individual will stand out in the image. So the nifty 50, the 50mm 1.8 prime is always a good bet. But When going to events, I always pack a telephoto lens, and this is one that people often don't consider. The great thing about a telephoto lens is that you don't need to be really close to your subject, and that way you can capture those images that aren't posed. Taking photos of people when they're not expecting it gives gives more natural, unposed, candid shots, and those are the kind of shots that I really like. So that would be my recommendation: pack a telephoto. Okay, so the Canon EOS M50 Mark II versus the M6 Mark II. Now, both compact cameras, both mirrorless cameras, and on paper, very, very similar cameras in terms of specs, the M6 being the more expensive of the two. Now, technically the M6 is the slightly better camera. There's not many differences, but the resolution is one of the key ones. You can shoot 14 frames per second as opposed to 10 with the M50 Mark II. So effectively the M6 is the better camera and you will pay more for it. But to be fair, the M50 Mark II has a viewfinder, whereas the M6 Mark II, it has an optional viewfinder that you have to pay extra for. And because the cameras are so close together, and I would love a viewfinder and I don't want to pay extra for it, I would probably save money and go for the M50 Mark II. Is the 1100D still a good camera even though it's 10 years old? Absolutely. I see plenty of people using the 1100D when I'm doing my courses and workshops, and they take great photos. Don't try and compare it with the latest cameras, because clearly 10 years is a long time in terms of cameras and camera technology. Things have advanced, but if you're on a budget and you don't mind buying an older camera, the 1100D would be a great starter camera. And also the money that you save on buying that camera, you could put towards the nifty 50, the lens that I recommend to all my Canon people. This and an 1100D would be a really cool kit. So I want to say a big thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I did try really hard to answer every single question, but if you did post a question that wasn't answered in the video, please go back and check your original post, because I'm going to try and answer every post individually that wasn't covered in the video. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, because it does help the channel grow and the videos get noticed. Consider subscribing if you want to see more from me. I do try and put out new videos every single week, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya. Bye.